For 200 years under our system of government, it was undisputed that the president had the constitutional power to stop unnecessary spending through what is known as impoundment. Very simply, this meant that if Congress provided more funding than was needed to run the government, the president could refuse to waste the extra funds and instead return the money to the general treasury and maybe even lower your taxes. Thomas Jefferson famously used this power, as did many other presidents, until it was wrongfully curtailed by the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. Not a very good act. This disaster of a law is clearly unconstitutional, a blatant violation of the separation of powers. When I return to the White House, I will do everything I can to challenge the Impoundment Control Act in court and, if necessary, get Congress to overturn it. We will overturn it. I will then use the president's long-recognized impoundment power to squeeze the bloated federal bureaucracy for massive savings.
Joining me now is Robert Romano, Vice President of Policy at Americans for Limited Government. Robert, I can think of no better expert on the federal budget than you. So you are my go-to person to help us understand what is this impoundment power that President Trump is talking about in the Constitution.
Well, the impoundment power, I mean, he mentions Thomas Jefferson. In 1803, there was an appropriation by Congress to purchase some gunboats for the port of New Orleans. But by the time he get around to spending it, he had already negotiated the Louisiana Purchase from France. And he said that, I don't need those gunboats for the port of New Orleans anymore because I just purchased Louisiana for the United States. So let's discuss that instead. And since then, presidents to varying degrees have used impoundment. And in the 1950s and 60s, it resulted in certain weapon systems not being green lighted. So a lot of more recently in modern history, it seems to revolve around the commander-in-chief clause and, and kind of directing resources in the exercise of military style operations until 1974, when Congress passed what is today the Budget Control Act. Now, Trump is talking about getting that repealed. Well, he would have to go to Congress for that. Assuming that there's not the votes to do that, then he would have to deal with impoundment such as it exists. Broadly speaking, you can, as president, impound something for 45 days, and then that could force a vote in Congress if they want to get the funds released sooner. Otherwise, after the 45 days, then the agency can just kind of continue on with its spending, and they'll just spend the money twice as fast. So it might not be I could see why he would want to have it repealed and go to a broader impoundment, because it would give the president more latitude to have a negotiation with Congress. Right now, the president really lacks leverage to force that question.
Thank you for that explanation, Robert. So realistically, what kind of leverage would President Trump have with this impoundment issue that he's bringing up?
Well, as I mentioned, after the 45 days, the agency or department or the appropriation line can then continue. If Congress is not compelled to act on those impoundments. So he's going to push for a reform. One reform might be that the votes be mandatory, that he's able to actually force votes on these impoundments, either to release the funds or to uphold similar to the Congressional Review Act, where the Congress can have can force a vote in both chambers on on repealing a regulation. So it could be broadened to some extent to give the president some more say in pushing these resolutions into Congress. I think that the president needs to still talk to Congress about the budget, though. These omnibus bills and these continuing resolutions, debt ceiling increases, they almost always seem to pass by super duper majorities that are veto proof. And so when you have both parties who are coordinating with one another to increase spending, it's very difficult for a president to do anything other than, symbolically veto something only to have it overridden. So having that leverage, if he could get the Impoundment Control Act expanded, I think that it's not the worst reform in the world, or to go back to an older system where the president did have more of a role, because we do need to control our spending it's out of control. And we're already over $31 trillion of national debt. The White House is projecting it will be more than 50 trillion by 2033. By my own calculation, the budget or the debt, national debt, has been expanding by more than 8% a year since 1980. At that rate, it'll be more like 69 or 70 trillion dollars by 2033, and maybe over 100 trillion by say 2040 something.
Well, Robert, you make an excellent point. It seems that Congress is not capable of reining itself in and controlling its spending. They have been spending out of control for decades. So I think a lot of Americans may hear what the president's saying and be like, right on. We need to have somebody in Washington who can control spending because Congress doesn't seem to be able to.
That's correct. And it does take a president. He would have to unite, if it were President Trump, he would have to unite the Republican Party in Congress around the idea that we're going to get the budget under control. It's just that typically what happens when a fresh majority comes in is they all have these, spending projects that they want to undertake that they've been probably sitting on for years. And so there's almost always that when you're in the majority, you want to, I want to spend money on my things now. We need, and so that is the dilemma. But it would take a united Republican Party with President Trump, or on the other side, a President Biden and a United Democratic Party. They would have to be the ones who want to cut spending. So it takes kind of coordination between the president and his party in Congress. I think under Paul Ryan, that relationship just wasn't there. Perhaps with Speaker McCarthy, President Trump would have a better relationship and stand a better chance of finally bringing the budget under control. But it's going to take both branches, the executive and the legislative, working together to truly resolve that issue. And it probably would take a president with a majority in one or both houses of Congress.
Well, thank you for that explanation, Robert. You've shed a lot of light on this, and we appreciate your time. Robert Romano, Vice President of Policy at Americans for Limited Government.